right, so today we're going to be going a little bit more into supply and demand, as we are going to continue to do with the third one. So what do we have so far? Okay, so we got two sides of the market, we have demand and supply. These both describe how quantity demanded and quantity supplied, respectively, respond to price. If the price changes, you want to supply more or sell less, or the other way around. We also talk about demand and supply shifts, right? Just knowing where the two cross only helps you if you actually know what those curves are, which often we don't. And if we do know them, we probably figured them out by first looking at the price of the quantities anyway. So why would we need to see the prices and quantities, sort of work backwards? That'd be kind of weird. But we can get a lot of use out of this if we're looking at shifts. So if we know how to translate a real world change into a shift on the demand and supply curves, we can figure out what's going to happen to prices and quantities in the future. We talked about a bunch of different determinants of demand and supply shifts, right? Talking about number of buyers and sellers changes. Even if the price happens to stay the same, then the quantity demanded or quantity supply would move, which would change the equilibrium as the thing shifts. So we also talked about what actually demand and supply are. We talked about how demand is determined by marginal benefit. How much additional benefit do you get? How much better off is your life in monetary terms as a result of getting one more unit of the good? That's going to determine how much you're willing to pay. If your life becomes $10 better off from buying something, then you're going to be willing to pay $10 to buy it or less. On the supply side, we have the marginal cost. How much does it cost to get that to market? And that, by the way, includes all the costs, right? Not just like materials or whatever, or even like if you talk to your accountant and you wrote down all the costs that go into producing your good, it wouldn't even be all of that. It would be more than that, because it includes your opportunity costs. Right? If you say to your accountant, hey, how much money did you make this year? They're not going to come back to you and say, oh yeah, we made negative $1 million. Our profits were actually $2 million. We would have made $3 million if we were doing something else. So negative $1 million, right? Your accountant's not going to say that, but an economist absolutely would say that. And so that's going to be incorporated in our marginal cost, which is important because we're trying to figure out. Your accountant would tell you that you're making a profit, but you would want to know if you could be making more money doing something else, right? That's going to be important to making your actual decision. So we want to know what our marginal costs are. That's going to determine how much we are willing to produce. These are both going to determine what our reservation prices are. Remember, those are the worst prices that we're willing to accept. If you're a consumer, it's the highest price you're willing to pay. If you're a producer, it's the lowest price you are willing to accept. You're not getting a good deal on these, but that's the worst that you would do. That's the point at which you'll start doing something. And then all these things are determined by the value you get from the unit you buy, or the cost to produce of the thing that you're selling, including all of your opportunity costs, cost of labor, cost of time, etc. We can solve these things together to get an equilibrium. We think that the equilibrium, the market's going to come to rest at a point where there's no excess supply or excess demand, right? Graphically, that's going to happen where the supply and demand curves cross. At that point, quantity supply is going to equal quantity demanded. No one's going to want to change what they're doing. Everybody who wants to buy at the current price is already buying. Everybody who wants to sell at the current price is already selling. There's certainly ways that the world could be improved at that point, but nobody can do it by themselves at that point. The idea. That's the equilibrium market price. We can work this out algebraically by just solving the supply and demand equations together. That tells us the one point at which both the supply relationship and the demand relationship are true at the same time, which is the point where we have the equilibrium. And we sort of are predicting that if the price is higher than the equilibrium price, it's going to sort of naturally fall as people try to find buyers for their stuff. Price is below the equilibrium price, it will sort of naturally rise as consumers are willing to pay more in order to find a unit of something they can't buy. If that doesn't happen, then you get you're stuck with your excess supply or excess demand. These shifts are driven by things that are other than price, right? The price changes, that is not going to give you a demand shift or a supply shift, right? Because the price changing is already baked into supply and demand. If we look at demand here, let's say that currently the price happens to be 15, and for whatever reason, the price drops to 13, right? The price drops to 13, we don't need to move this curve around to figure out what's going to happen. We already know that if the price falls to 13, here's what's going to happen to our quantity demand, right? It's already baked into that demand curve. The demand curve only shifts if you would buy more or less of that good at the same price, right? If something changes about how many units you buy at a price of 15, that's when we get a demand shift. Even if the price isn't still 15, right? It's a hypothetical. If the price had stayed 15, would you have bought more or less than you used to? And if not, there's no shift. Same thing goes with supply. We can use these shifts to figure out what's going to happen to the market. We just look at our equilibrium before, equilibrium after, and we're going to get a prediction about what's going to change in the market. Right, here's supply and demand. Here's our equilibrium. B star, Q star. And let's say we have a supply increase. I'm going to shift S over there to S prime. Right, that's our marker for new. We have our new equilibrium, which we find the exact same way as before. I'm just looking for where the supply and demand curves cross. We just have new supply and demand curves now. It's P prime, Q prime. And so we'd say, hey, whatever this thing was that caused the supply shift to increase, supply to increase, it's probably going to decrease the price and increase the quantity. If we have two shifts, we're not going to be able to predict both sides, both price and quantity. We're going to know one of them, but not the other. We can combine the two shifts and see where they agree and where they don't. All right, so here's a supply shift. Let's also draw in a demand shift up here and see what happens. Let's say demand is going to decrease. Here's our new equilibrium. With this demand decrease, we would expect that price is going to go down and quantity is also going to go down. So we know that if we combine these two shifts on the same graph, we can ask, okay, what's going to happen to price? Well, the demand shift says the price is going to go down. The supply shift also says the price is going to go down. Those two agree. Those two effects are going to compound. We're going to get a drop in price. On quantity, though, costs less to produce. So, people want to sell more of it, so that's going to be a quantity increase. If we want to buy less of it, it's going to be a quantity decrease. We don't know which of those effects is going to win out. So just with that information alone, we don't know what's going to happen to quantity. In order to figure out whether quantity is going to go up or down, we would need to have some information about the relative size of those shifts. If one of them was really big and the other one was really small, then that's the side that would sort of win out to expect.